promise to be brief keynote. Never stand between people in the bar, especially not on Saturday night. And I was delighted to find out about all of the great things that are happening through this group. And it's a tough act to follow those scholars and all the amazing things that they're doing. But I'll try. I used to come to Seattle a lot. Back in the mid-2000s, as Leslie mentioned, Washington State DOT was a client. I was involved in the Western States case, did some work for Sound Transit. And I always love to come here. The energy, the feel, the people. It's a great, sophisticated city, but still friendly. I mean, I really am from Chicago, so I'm a Midwestern girl. And yeah, there's some people here, yes. Yes, Chicago is the greatest city in the world except in January, which is one reason why now I live in Oakland. But it's really very good to be here and to see a lot of old friends. You know, they say that no man is a hero in his own land, but I certainly hope that there are some women who are heroes here, because I hope you all know who you have. You have Leslie, known throughout the country and promoting inclusion efforts, particularly in the transit industry. You have Brenda Nambi. Yes, thank you, Leslie. And then you have my dear friend, Brenda Nambi. Brenda and I have been friends for 20 years. I first met Brenda, I came to Seattle to give a speech. She is known throughout the nation as a leader in disadvantaged business enterprise programs, inclusion. She's sought after by Federal Highway Administration. People all around the country know her to be a national expert and leader, and you are truly blessed to have her. And I am honored to call her my friend. And then we also have another great friend, Ruby Jones from Turner Construction. And Ruby is on the board of the American Contract Compliance Association, which I have the honor of serving as general counsel. And Ruby's just been a force of nature in getting ACCA on track. We had a fabulous National Training Institute in San Jose last month. For those of you that are in this part of the business, please do come and visit us in Palm Beach next year. And we train compliance officers from around the nation, and Ruby has just been instrumental in bringing that organization to a new level. So we always want to thank her. So let me just say a few things about what I see. I've been involved in minority business issues for 25 years now. And it certainly has been an interesting journey. We've been fighting to increase the share of contracts and opportunities and dollars going to minority and small businesses, and to grow more and larger minority contractors and other types of disadvantaged firms. So what I'd like to do for just a few minutes is to share my reflections on the state of what's going on across the country. I do work everywhere, and what I see, and to challenge you to, as Ollie said, get in the game. Now, I just have to be brutally honest and say that I know almost nothing about sports, which is a good thing if you started with the Bears, I guess, and you moved to Oakland, where the Raiders are, you know, their own experience, I guess. And then I saw the football film, and that looked like maybe that was San Francisco's uniforms, but I wasn't too sure. So I'm not going to go down the sports road, because I will be sure to say something stupid. But I certainly do think that the point about being challenged to get in there and keep doing it is very, very, very important. I think this is especially urgent given the national conversation that we seem to be trying to have about race in the wake of the incident, unfortunate death in Ferguson, Missouri. I have been doing a lot of work in Missouri the last year or so. We're just about to finish up the disparity study for the state of Missouri. And done a lot of work there over the years, and so it's been a very interesting thing to see that community sort of face down some of its demons and begin to pull together about what they're going to do. So I want to challenge you all here. You may not have had the same incident that they had in Ferguson, but unless Seattle is a very different place than any place else in America, we still certainly need to have a conversation about race. And it's getting harder and harder to deny that these are continuing issues, and that, at least in my view, we certainly have not moved to a post-racial anything. You still certainly find race to be a huge challenge. And actually, if you're interested in it from a historical perspective, there's a review in today's New York Times of a fascinating book. I just started to read it last week, and I want to be sure I get the title right. It's called "The Half Has Never Been Told: Slavery in the Making of American Capitalism." It's by a professor, history professor at Columbia University named Ed Baptist, and it's a fascinating historical look at the ways in which the labor of African Americans helped to create the wealth in this country. And one of the things that I like to talk about is how do we now figure out how we're going to participate and be about business, not be the subject of business, to be in commerce, not to be an object of it. So what are the objectives? Well, I think certainly more work. Everybody needs more work, certainly coming out of the Great Recession, which for many communities was more like the Lesser Depression, and certainly if you're in the construction industry. And so more work is really critical. But we also need growth. It isn't just work for work's sake. As I try to counsel new small businesses, it's not what you made, it's what you kept. And so the ability to grow and support our businesses, support our communities, to be able to provide scholarships for these amazing young people, that's what it's all about. It's also about equity and fairness. Nobody's asking for a handout. All people want is a fair shot. But I think we recognize increasingly that all sorts of unconscious bias and barriers, systemic things that stand in the way of people's success have got to be addressed. It isn't good enough to just try to do it on your own. So what have been some of the challenges? Well, speaking of growth, there really hasn't been a whole lot for minority businesses, and particularly for Black-owned businesses. When I started doing work on disadvantaged business enterprise programs, minority business programs, Black contractors were about 2% of the dollars going from the federal government at USDOT. They're still 2%. So we really have not made a lot of progress, I think, in some ways there. And so one of the things I want to ask you all about is how do you plan to be part of moving that needle? How are you going to move things forward now so that you do see more equity and more inclusion? Certainly, we're seeing a lot of research out there. I do a lot of work on disparity studies, and we're seeing a lot of very poor quality work that is leading to programs being struck down or going all race neutral. I don't know any place where discrimination's been fixed. So certainly, in my view, we need these programs. Poor program administration is also a continuing problem, leads to indictments, lack of political support. And I think importantly, it tends to undermine the political will and the moral basis for why inclusion and equity are critical. I can give you lots of data. I mean, I live with big data all day long. Nobody loves an Excel spreadsheet more than I do. But you still need to be able to explain, I think, why fairness and inclusion goes beyond just being a business strategy. Yes, it is a business strategy, but it's more than that. What is it that's supposed to make our country better and greater? Well, it's been a commitment to fairness and inclusion, to opportunity for you no matter where you come from. That really is our promise that we've made to ourselves and to the rest of the world, and we need to be about the business of keeping it. The other problem with poor program administration is that it can lead to this sort of false complacency as, oh, well, we have these programs, so of course it's all good. Well, it isn't, and so it's important to do this correctly, I think. Certainly when I come to the state of Washington, and now that I live in the state of California, the attacks on these programs through things like, it's Initiative 200, right? That's what it's called. And I know Ali had mentioned that, which was a constitutional amendment that was passed that makes it extremely difficult to do things on the basis of race, to have real affirmative action programs. We have the same situation in California just a little bit earlier, Proposition 209. Recently, Michigan passed something similar, so did Nebraska. Ward Connerly, who was the gentleman who was pushing these initiatives, thought he was going to come to Illinois and have a constitutional amendment to ban affirmative action. But he didn't do his homework, because in Illinois, we don't have any constitutional referenda process like that. You want to amend the Illinois Constitution, you have to go through both houses of the legislature and the governor. And I can assure you that nobody in Illinois was talking about getting rid of affirmative action. You know, people tease me out here like, oh, you're a Chicago, person. They all vote early and often, and they throw Rod Blagojevich out there. We've actually had 4 Illinois governors go to jail in my lifetime. Not a good track record, but there's something to be said for that kind of control. So we've got a strong commitment in Illinois to affirmative action. Certainly Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who some of you may have certainly seen on television, our Governor Pat Quinn, the commitment is there. But yet still in all, it's hardly a panacea to be there as well. And so what I see is that ultimately the real question becomes lack of political will and lack of organizing and commitment. I can draft anything. I'm a good drafter. I've been doing it a long time. I can draft you policies and procedures and forms, and we can get electronic data collection systems, and I can tell you how to run a program, and you all know how to run a program too, because you've got some of the best people in the country that are your own resources right here. But if you don't have political will and you're not organized, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I can't draft my way out of this. I can't draft my way out of a problem. I can't do a study. We do studies. I think we do good studies. But okay, so what are we going to go prove? What I think y'all already know, that there's a problem. And you go and you spend a lot of money to go convince federal judges of it, because that's what we have to do now. But ultimately, it's about political resources and will, which is why I think we have seen some success. So I certainly don't want to be up here, especially after dinner, and be throwing cold water on everybody. If nothing else, we're mostly still here. When the recession arrived, I was deeply, deeply worried about what was going to happen to a lot of these small businesses, especially Black-owned businesses who are grotesquely undercapitalized. In the end, it is really about the money, and if you can't get any, you can't sustain yourself over these humps. But mostly people have survived. We certainly, I think, have increased awareness of the importance of minority business and growing the economy, and increased activism by minority and women-owned businesses. Been lately very involved with the National Association of Minority Contractors. I think there's a chapter here as well. People are starting to organize themselves. They're going to Washington. They're making themselves heard. I know you have your senator here. These are the things that you need to do if you want to make this work. So I think people are much more sophisticated now about how to make the process work for themselves. I'm also seeing that in the creation of alliances with larger firms, seeing a lot more mentor protege programs now, where larger firms are taking on minority-owned or women-owned businesses as a protege, helping them to learn the rules of the game, so to speak, because they can teach you stuff in school, but they can't teach you how it really works. You need somebody to hold your hand and show you, hey, I know they said this, but this is how it really goes down. To make that phone call for you when you need someone to help you. That's what so many of our businesses lack, and these new programs and these new initiatives, I think, are a good step towards trying to fill that gap. Also, an increased focus outside of construction. Now, I love construction. I started out life as a construction lawyer, and in many ways, I'm still a construction lawyer, and what I really am is a frustrated architect. But I had no talent, so I have a good eye, but I can't draw, and so we just go and practice law. We don't have to have much talent, I don't think. So I love construction, but I also know that there's a whole lot else going on in the economy. So I'm delighted to see a lot of minority and women-owned firms now focusing on healthcare, because we baby boomers are going to do nothing but get older, and it's a huge and growing part of the economy. Focusing on energy. I was delighted to see the scholarships about clean energy and green energy. I think there's a lot of potential there. Certainly we're seeing private sector firms step up. They're moving into supplier diversity. They recognize that it is good business, and that's, I think, a very important development. So, what should you do? What should we all do? Well, certainly I think the first thing is to keep the faith. It can be very difficult and lonely to do this work. It's hard to run a business. It really is. It's a great dream, and I've been running my own firm for 20 years now, so I guess it's not an experiment anymore. But I certainly still have some days when I think, maybe I should call up that law firm and, let somebody else worry about all this stuff for a minute. So it's not an easy thing to do. And so keeping the faith and keeping the faith with each other is really, really important. The crabs in the barrel thing has got to stop. It's just got to stop. Everybody's so busy looking down. I'm like, look up. Who's standing on top of you? Stop worried about the people down below. Reach down. Reach sideways. Hold each other up in faith and support. And yeah, y'all don't have to be best friends all the time, and yes, you may be in some competition, but I can assure you that you need each other much more than you need to be competing or tearing each other down in any way. It really is what will lift you up. And I know some of y'all know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? So, importantly, I think, get your facts straight. It's really important to understand discrimination is real. These are complicated issues. If they were simple and easy, we would have done it by now. When somebody says, oh, think outside the box, I'm like, we don't even have a box. I gotta build a box first, then we can think outside of it. Okay, let's get the basic stuff right. First, affirmative action on the cheap does not work. If you are talking to an agency or a company or anybody and they claim to be committed, what you really should ask them is, what resources are you putting towards this problem that you claim you want to solve? I have one state, shall remain unnamed, it's not Washington, that is a client that's, I would say, middle-sized to large. They have 3 people to run their state MBE program. So when I met with the governor and he said, well, what do you think we should do? And I said, how about hire some people? How are you gonna run a program with 3 people? A state? You can't run a small city like that. So it's important to ask people, are in fact the resources being made available? Get educated about what works. We actually have a lot of data, and if you ever want studies or data, just email me because I have more of that stuff than anybody wants. It's important to understand, though, what does work. We were talking briefly before about access to capital. Well, one of the problems about these loan underwriting programs is that they don't change the underwriting standards. If you keep applying the same standards to our smaller firms that you do to these larger firms, of course they're not going to qualify. Of course not. So what works? We do actually have some ideas about what will work. Get ready. I don't know about you, but my parents told me that I had to be twice as good and work twice as hard to get half as far. And you probably heard some of that too. I hate to say this, but I think it's probably still true to a large extent, which means we have to be ready. When the opportunity arises, you have to be ready to step up then. Not, oh, I'll call you in 2 years. So educate yourselves now. Get organized. Hold your decision makers accountable. Demand that they put their money where their mouths are, that they display leadership from the top. If you don't have that commitment at the top of an organization, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what else you say, because people follow their leaders. So lead, become leaders. Develop a common agenda. One of the things that I really do enjoy about living on the West Coast and spending time with people on the West Coast is that in some ways, agendas are not as entrenched here. I did a lot of work in Mississippi in the last couple of years. And people will start talking to me about stuff that happened 50, 75 years ago. And it's important to know that history. But sometimes it can get in the way of developing a common agenda, of recognizing that we have a lot of different kinds of people that now live in our country. And we need to reach out to them. It always distresses me when I hear about minority groups fighting with minority groups, and the minority groups are fighting with the white women, and everybody's fighting. No, you've really got to develop a common agenda and find yourself some allies. Support groups like Tabor with money and your expertise, your time, and your talents. Ollie's fabulous, but she can't do it by herself. She's really got to have you. So stay focused. Got to keep your eye on the goalpost. I don't know, maybe that's football, I think. I really, when I say I really don't know anything about sports, you really, it's true. My poor father, you know, I'm an only child, and he had this one girl, and he was a sports-mad person, and so I just think he was always so deeply disappointed in me because I just could never kind of get with it. But I do know something about reaching a goal, and I know that you do need to stay focused. I think you also have to stay hopeful, which is not an easy place to be sometimes. But you do, you know, we live in expectancy, right? The hope of things to come. And certainly, even in, you know, my lifetime, and I'm no kid anymore, but I haven't been around forever, to see the changes that have come. The day that President Obama got elected, both my parents have long passed away. And I just sat there, and all I could think of was how happy they would have been, how happy my grandparents would have been, how happy that line of ancestors stretching all the way back to the first people that got snatched would have been. And I didn't really believe it could happen sometimes. And I'm from Chicago, and shoot, you know, we carried Illinois like 88%. We want to know who those other people were. So we went to Indiana and Ohio and other places. I moved to Indiana basically for 2 months that year to make that happen. So we should hope for what we can imagine. So let's go get that. And then finally, I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes. In the immortal words of that great American philosopher, Billy Preston, nothing from nothing means nothing. But something from something can really get you something. So let's all go about the business of doing something. Thank you very much.